We welcome in the coach for the Alabama Crimson Tide. The man has won 87% of his games at Alabama. He's a five-time national champion at Alabama, six-time national champion overall, one of, if not the greatest coach in the history of college football. The one and only Nick Saban is here with me right now. Coach, good afternoon. It's good to see you, sir. How are you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Listen, before we get into any football conversation, because we have you here, you're doing detail, highlighting your quarterback Tua Tagovailoa and the way that he's performed and breaking him down. Before we get into any of that, I want you to discuss briefly this coronavirus situation has just invaded all of our lives globally, not just nationally. How are you dealing with it with your program? How do you believe college football is dealing with it thus far?
Well, I think the best we can do is we have to try to control the circumstance. We can't let the circumstance sort of control us. And so we've been doing as much with our players to keep them engaged, whether it's academically, whether it's in leadership, personal development type stuff, as well as we have 4 hours a week that we're allowed to have some football related type stuff. So we're trying to monitor all these situations with the players and try to help them stay engaged as much as possible so that they do well academically, that they stay in some kind of physical conditioning. So whenever this is over, maybe we can get a good start on what we can do, whether it's in the summer or in the fall. And we want to try to keep them engaged mentally. This is challenging for everybody, but I think the message out there has to be what we've all been saying all along. You have to respect social distancing. You have to have, a lot of thanks for all the people who are out there on the front line every day working so hard to try to keep us healthy, our healthcare workers and so forth. So this is a different time for all of us. So it's a difficult adjustment, but I think staying positive and staying focused on what you can control is the most important thing.
Coach, educate us about the kind of things that we're hearing. We've heard from the AD of Notre Dame. We've heard from the AD of Ohio State and others essentially asking the question that if we reach the conclusion that it's not safe for fans to be in attendance when football games are taking place, then how should we feel rather about the players themselves being safe? How do you answer that?
Well, I think, it's a hypothetical circumstance or situation, right now to make predictions about what's going to happen in the fall. But look, we would never want our players to ever be put in a situation where they're not going to be safe. But I do think, if we come up with some solutions, we'll be able to manage smaller groups, like, for instance, we could test all of our players and then we could have some protocol for every day that they come in the building as to whether they're healthy or going to infect somebody else. Now, when you're talking about fans, that's probably a more difficult circumstance and situation, to try to control. So we got a lot of smart people out there. They all have, player safety, player well-being, the best interests of the players in mind, just like we do in our program. So we don't want to ever put them in harm's way, but I think, there has to be some plan at some point in time to try to get people back to normal. And I know that's going to be a difficult transition for us, but something that we're all trying to contribute to a safe and healthy way to do that.
My last question to you on this particular matter, what kind of role would you like to have in the decision-making process, not just considering your credentials as a champion, but your intellect, your willingness to speak your mind about a lot of different issues. Obviously, you bring a lot to the table from an ideas perspective. What kind of role would you like to have in the decision-making process and reaching a conclusion to all of this?
Well, I think this has to be a medical decision, relative to the timetable of when we can come back. So I don't really think I'm qualified to make a contribution, to that. But I do think that once we reach that conclusion, that there's a lot of very well experienced and qualified people to determine, all right, what's the best way to manage players back to get them to a point where they're ready to be able to compete, play, or whatever that is. And, the way I've looked at it is, I look at a lot of the NFL pro experience that we've had through the years. where we didn't, ever have spring practice or put on pads in the off season or whatever. We had OTA day type of, training in the off season in April and May and mini camps and things like that. To activate some of those things, if we're able to get back at some point in time in the summer, probably would be a better way to prepare the players than making a longer fall camp or something of that nature. So that's the part of it that I think some of the coaches need to have some input on and listen to when the medical folks finally decide this is the way we can go forward.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.